So we're approaching Chanukah, and it's interesting, there's not much written about Chanukah in the Gemaras. You have a few dapim, a few pages in Shabbos. It's basically all Amoraim. You don't have any Mishnayos that really discuss Chanukah. The only Mishnah I think that you have that discusses Chanukah is what we learned in Daf Yomi today, and what we'll see also in Perek HaKonos, about if someone lights a fire outside of his store and a camel laden with flax comes by and gets burnt up by it. So Rabbi Yehuda said that if the light that he lights outside is a Ner Chanukah, which you're supposed to light outside, so then he's absolved of liability because he was doing a mitzvah. That's basically the only Mishnah that talks about Chanukah, which is quite amazing. But of course, the classic Gemara in Shabbos Chaf Aleph and Beis asks the question, "My Chanukah, what is Chanukah?" Rashi immediately says, "Al eiz nes keva'ua," based on what miracle? Because Rashi knows that there's two miracles when it comes to Chanukah. There's the miracle of the Pach HaShemen, of the jug of oil, that should have only lasted for 1 day, but it lasted for 8 days. And then we know there was the miracle of the war. So Rashi is saying what the Gemara is trying to figure out is, obviously there were two miracles. They were both fantastic. Which one is the one that Chazal based the Chag on? So if you look at the Gemara there, it tells you, the 25th of Kislev, you have starts 8 days of Chanukah, you cannot eulogize, you cannot fast. Why? Because this is the day that, and Chaf Hei is the day that the Jews went into the Heichal. They defeated, right? They went into Shenichnas. So it says over here that when the Greeks went into the temple, they defiled of the oil. Shegavra Malchut Beit Hashmoneans v'nitzchum. And when the house of Hashmoneans defeated the Greeks, they found that there was no oil. And then in the end, they found one jug of oil that was still sealed with the Kohen Gadol seal. It only had enough oil to last for 1 day. A miracle happened. It lasted for 8 days. Following year, they established these 8 days as Yamim Tovim B'Halel V'Hoda. The Gemara really does not mention the war as a miracle. It's just telling you historically that when the Hashmoneans defeated the Greeks, doesn't say how. It says when they defeated the Greeks and they went back in to clean out the temple, they only found 1 day worth of oil. Miracle lasted for 8 days. And therefore the Chachamim declared an 8-day festival of Hallel and Hodah. If you look at the Rambam in the beginning of Hilchas Chanukah, the first halacha, he gives you a totally different outlook. He tells you about how the terrible decrees when the Greeks were persecuting the Jews, ubitlu daitam, and they made them go against, they tried to cancel out Judaism. They didn't let them engage in Torah or mitzvahs. They stole, they raped our daughters. Sounds familiar. And then we finally went into the Heichal, or they went into the Heichal. They went into the sanctuary. They made breaches and they were metame everything. They defiled everything. And they caused a lot of tsaros to Am Yisrael. V'lachatzum lachatz gadol. Until Hashem had mercy on us, v'hoshia miyadam v'etzilam v'gaver b'nei Hashmoneans. He tells you about, he concentrates on the miracle of the war. Hashem had mercy on us, and he had the b'nei Hashmoneans, the Kohanim Gedolim, defeat the Greeks. V'hoshia Yisrael miyadam, and Hashem saved us from their hands. And then king from the b'nei Hashmoneans was established until 200 years forth when the second temple was destroyed. But it says that, then he brings the story of the oil. The Rambam tells us, in the very first halacha, tells us all about the war. And he says it was a miracle. What? Kohanim Gedolim, Kollel guys, Roshi Yeshiva, Kohanim Gedolim, they've never murdered anyone in their life. Right? We know, Kohanim, you can't even use a metal instrument to hew the Mizbeach, because the Mizbeach and the Kohanim add life, they don't take away life. And over here, they had to go against their nature, and they rose and they had to kill the Greeks, something they've never done before. So these are people that are not seasoned warriors. And the Rambam is telling us there was a phenomenal miracle in the war. You also happen to have the miracle of the oil. So it's funny, like the Gemara seems to stress the oil, doesn't even mention the war. The Rambam stresses 90% the war, the miracle of the defeat, the military defeat. And he also says that, he agrees with the Gemara. Why did they establish Chanukah? That was because of the oil. What's the idea? The idea is that the Rambam is telling us that the main miracle for why we rejoice is the military war. If it wasn't for the military war, we would have lost our Yiddishkeit. Judaism would have been lost, right? They were lashkicham torasecha. Yavin is the epitome of darkness. They darkened our eyes They caused us to forget our Torah learning and our mitzvahs. If it weren't for these 13, they say, around 13 Kohanim from Yochanan's family, Judaism would have perished. And so certainly that is the tremendous simcha of Chanukah, that Judaism was saved. Literally, Judaism was saved. The question is, why did we then need the miracle of the oil? The answer is that, and as we see even today, that no matter how miraculous a military victory could be, you give it 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, and those very same generals that at the time would admit that this was a miraculous victory, HaKadosh Baruch Hu was helping us in our battle beyond a shadow of a doubt. You let enough time pass, the novelty wears off, the inspiration wears off, and then you could find a way to say, yeah, somehow 13 guys were able to defeat 100,000 Greek-Syrian soldiers. So therefore, Kadosh Baruch Hu sent us a miracle that we could not deny. There's no way that anyone could say that, according to the laws of nature, 1 day's worth of oil could last for 8 days. And so therefore, the reason why Kadosh Baruch Hu sent the miracle of the oil was to tell us that in case somewhere down the line in history, you're going to doubt whether I was behind the military victory, you should know I'm letting you know that I was there. I was there with the oil, and therefore it's like we discussed a few weeks ago, the Leitzane Hador, right? Like what do you gain by saying that Sarah was impregnated by Avimelech? She was still 90 years old and she had no uterus. I mean, you still can't deny Kadosh Baruch Hu. But again, so the idea is that Hashem is saying that look at the menorah, look at the 8 days lasting instead of 1 day. You'll recognize I'm here. Once you recognize I'm here at the oil, you'll recognize that I was the one behind the victory as well, because there's no way in nature that 13 Rosh Yeshiva who've never picked up a gun in their life, a sword in their life, could go and defeat 100,000 people. But I heard from my Rosh Yeshiva a beautiful idea. He said, on the other hand, there's another reason why we needed the miracle of the oil. If we did not have the miracle of the oil, and we only had the miracle of the war, even if it was irrefutable, undeniable, but still, and it would be a reason for simcha, would that be a reason to say Hallel for 8 days? That gets to the question, well, for what miracle do you say Hallel? So there is a question that's asked in Hilchas Pesach. The Shulchan Aruch writes that we only say full Hallel on the first day of Pesach. All the other 6 days, day 2 to day 7 of Pesach, we only say half Hallel. Now, saying half Hallel is basically like not saying Hallel at all. It's not considered a real Hallel. So, certainly from a biblical perspective, we don't say Hallel on any of the days of Pesach except for the first day. So that the question is, the Taz asked the question, others, the Medrash asked the question, why don't we say Hallel on the 7th day? First of all, the 7th day is a Yom Tov, so maybe you'll say it's not a new Yom Tov like Shmini Atzeret. But it's a full Yom Tov. There's no Malacha. It's a full Yom Tov. And not only that, wasn't there a phenomenal miracle that took place on the 7th day of Pesach? Kriyat Yamsuf. Kriyat Yamsuf was the pinnacle of Yetziat Mitzrayim. Isn't that certainly deserving of a full Hallel? So the Taz answers the question with the Medrash. Hashem says, you can't say a Hallel if human beings are dying. They might be the bad team, right? Who was dying in Kriyat Yamsuf? The Egyptians. The bad guys were dying. We were being saved. Tremendous miracle. And Klal Yisrael at the time, those that actually experienced the salvation of being saved, and they saw the Egyptians dead on the ocean, they could say a full Hallel. That's what Az Yashar was. Az Yashar was a Shiur. It was a full Hallel. However, we cannot say. The Taz says we, 3,500 years later, cannot say Hallel on the 7th day of Pesach, because for us, it's not a Hallel. It's not a Hallel based on what we experienced. It's a Hallel acknowledging that HaKadosh Baruch Hu 3,500 years ago did an amazing miracle. The Taz says a fundamental idea. He says to say Hallel as a shevach, as a thanksgiving, as an appreciation that Hashem did a miracle for Klal Yisrael 3,000 years ago, that we cannot say if other human beings died as a result. If there was any type of collateral damage, even if it was the bad guys, you can't say Hallel. That's why Hashem told the Malachim at the time who wanted to say Hallel. Hashem said, "Ma'isi yadai tfuim b'yam v'atem rotzim lomar shira." My human beings, my creations are drowning, and you want to say shira. So how could the Jews say Shiur? Because they were experiencing the salvation. When you experience the salvation, you could say full Hallel even if people are dying, even if the bad guys are dying, even if the enemies are dying. But 3,000 years later, when we are commemorating it as a nostalgia to remember what happened, so then we can't say Hallel if there were other human beings that were dying. That's why the Taz says we don't say Hallel on the seventh day. If we don't say Hallel on the seventh day, and Chol Hamoed is certainly not as kadosh as Yom Tov. So if you're not going to say Hallel on the seventh day of Yom Tov, it's not appropriate to say Hallel on the intermediary days as well. There are other reasons given, but that's the reason for the Taz. So then the question is, based on the idea of the Taz, that unless we were the ones that lived through the salvation, we cannot say Hallel if other human beings died from that salvation. How do we say full Hallel every day of Hanukkah? During the war, there were tens of thousands of Greeks that died. So why don't we apply the same idea of the Taz that says, My Siyada, Hashem says to us, right? You want to say Hallel 2,000 years later to commemorate the miracle of the war? You can't do that because the war involved the wicked dying, and you can't say full Hallel for that. So why do we say full Hallel? That's why the Gemara says, you know why we say full Hallel? Over the miracle of the oil. The main miracle, without a doubt, was the military miracle. We didn't even need the miracle of the oil. What do you need a miracle of the oil for? The halacha is tuma hutra b'tzibur. You're allowed to light with impure oil. We didn't even need it. But the question is that still, but if you're going to say that full Hallel could only be said if it's an expression of thanks, hodah, and not shevach, and not praise, because in the Chanukah episode people died, so then you have to say that the Hallel that we say on Chanukah is a Hallel of hodah. And it could be that's what the Gemara means when the Gemara says, what they were kaveya yemei Hallel v'hodah. It could mean Hallel shel hodah. They were kaveya that we should say Hallel as an expression of hodah. What are we thankful for on Chanukah? We're thankful for Chanukah, not just for winning the war, because the effects of that victory are gone. Once the base of Mikdash was destroyed, so then we don't see the benefits of the victory. The victory was a temporary one. So why are we saying full Hallel of Hodah? What are we thankful for? We're thankful for the fact that the miracle of the oil tells us that a Kadosh Baruch Hu wanted to send a message. Yeah, you could have lit with impure oil. You know why I did the miracle? I want you to light with pure oil. The message is that Kedusha will definitely, not maybe, will definitely be victorious over darkness. Judaism will always overcome their enemies because we're not fighting a war of land. We're fighting a war of spirituality, of what the purpose of life is. So this Hanukkah should be that with the power of our lighting, we should be zocheh to bring back the power of Kedusha as a tremendous light. And just like Hashem was with us 2,000 years ago, when the forces of goodness overcame the forces of darkness, so too Am Yisrael will overcome the choshech of Hamas and all of our Rishonim, and will be zocheh to the third base of Mikdash, the Gula Shleim B'mher B'meinu Amen.